There is a question that most people who want to build something never ask themselves honestly. Not the question of whether they have enough money, though they ask that one constantly. Not the question of whether the timing is right, or whether the market is ready, or whether they have the right connections or the right degree or the right circumstances. The question they never ask is this: do I know enough about people? Not about business, not about profit margins or supply chains or social media algorithms, about people, about what they actually need, as opposed to what they say they need, about what makes them choose one thing over another, about what problem, sitting quietly in their lives, is waiting for someone to notice it and solve it. Mr. Robert had spent 40 years learning the answer to that question. He just didn't know it yet. He had built 3 companies. Not successful in the polite way that people mean when they say successful, comfortable, respectable, nothing to complain about. Actually successful. The kind of success that changes the people around you. Hundreds of employees whose children went to school because of payroll that came reliably. Communities that look different because of the taxes a healthy business generates. Suppliers who grew their own operations because someone needed what they produced. He had done this 3 times, with different products in different industries, and each time the fundamental thing was the same. He had paid attention to people and gave them something that made their lives actually better, and they had returned the favor by building something with him that neither of them could have built alone. At 67, he handed the last of his companies to his sons and moved to a village outside the city. Not because he was tired exactly. He was tired of the scale of things, the meetings that required lawyers, the decisions that moved through 12 layers of approval before reaching the people who would actually execute them, the particular loneliness of being at the top of something large. He wanted to remember what small felt like, what directly felt like, what it felt like to do something with your hands and hand it to a person and watch their face. He thought he was retiring. He was wrong. The village had a market that opened 3 days a week in the square near the old temple. He had always thought better while walking, and markets were good for thinking because they were full of the thing he had spent 40 years studying: human beings in the act of making decisions. He watched how people moved through the stalls, what they stopped at, what they picked up and put back down, what made them open their wallets without hesitating and what made them hesitate. He watched the sellers as carefully as the buyers, how they spoke about their products, how they responded to questions, what they understood about their own customers, and what they were guessing at. He did this for 2 weeks, without talking to anyone, just watching, taking notes in the small notebook he had carried for 40 years. On the 3rd week, a man called to him from a small stall at the market's edge. "Sir, good morning. Try one?" He was holding out a piece of something fried, golden, smelling of spices Robert couldn't immediately identify. His face was open and warm, with the particular generosity of someone who genuinely enjoys sharing what they do, rather than someone performing generosity for commercial reasons. Robert took the piece. He was not prepared for how good it was. David had been making the same snack for 10 years. He explained this to Robert over the next half hour, as Robert ate several more pieces and asked questions with the focused curiosity of someone who has learned that the most important information is almost never in the answer to the first question. The recipe had come from his grandmother. He had adapted it slightly over the years: less oil, different proportions of the spices, a longer cooking time based on what he noticed people responded to. He made it himself every morning before the market opened, which meant waking up at 4. He sold it in small plastic packets that he bought in bulk from the city, which ate into his margins more than he liked, but which he had never found a way around. His customers were loyal. 20 or 30 of them came to his stall every market day without fail. They had been coming for years. Their children had grown up eating his snack, but the number had never grown much beyond those 20 or 30. "I've tried selling to the shops in town," he said, with a rueful expression that Robert recognized as the expression of someone who has attempted something reasonable and been treated as if the attempt itself was slightly absurd. "They say the packaging isn't right. that it doesn't look like a product, that they can't put it on their shelves looking like that. He gestured at the plain plastic packet on his table. But I don't know how to make it look different. And even if I did, I couldn't afford to buy packaging in the quantities they wanted. Robert looked at the packet for a moment, then at the snack, then at David's face, which was the face of someone who had been solving a problem with the tools available to him for 10 years and had simply run out of tools. "May I take a few packets home?" he asked. "Of course. No charge. I insist on paying." David charged him far too little. Robert paid it without arguing, because he understood that arguing about generosity with someone who has very little of it to spare is a kind of disrespect. That evening, Robert sat at the kitchen table of his rented house and looked at David's snack for a long time. He thought about the 40 years, about the first company he had built, which had failed twice before it succeeded, and about what the failures had taught him that success never could. About the second company, which had succeeded quickly, and which he had nearly lost because quick success had made him stop listening to customers the way he had listened when the survival of the business depended on it. About the third company, which he had built most carefully of all, and which had taught him the thing he believed most deeply about business. The lesson was not about capital or timing or market research or competitive positioning, though all of those things mattered. The lesson was about problems, specifically about the gap between the problem a customer thinks they have and the problem they actually have. Most people selling things sell solutions to the stated problem, the thing the customer says they need. The great businesses, in Robert's experience, sold solutions to the actual problem, the thing the customer needed but hadn't yet found language for. David's customer thought they had a problem with packaging. They didn't want to put his product on their shelves because it looked wrong. But the actual problem was simpler and larger than that. The actual problem was that a genuinely good product existed, and the people who would value it didn't know about it because no one had built the bridge between the product and those people. The packaging was just the surface. Underneath it was the whole question of what David's snack was for, who it was for, and what story it needed to tell to reach them. Robert opened his notebook and began to write. He spent the next month walking through the village and the surrounding area, through the small markets and the roadside stalls, and the cramped back rooms of shops where owners kept their accounts by hand in notebooks that had been used for years. He talked to everyone who would talk to him: sellers, buyers, farmers, small manufacturers, the women who ran the cooperative near the edge of the village that processed local grains into flour. He asked them what was hard, what was expensive, what they needed that they couldn't easily get. The answer that came back most consistently, from the small food businesses particularly, was flour. Not the flour itself, there was plenty of flour available, but the price of it was unpredictable. The quality was inconsistent, and the quantities in which it was sold were often too large for a small operation that needed a week's supply rather than a month's. Robert listened to this answer for 3 weeks before he trusted it enough to do anything with it. This was the discipline he had learned over 40 years. The discipline of waiting until you have heard the same answer enough times from enough different people that you can be reasonably confident you are hearing a real signal, rather than a coincidence. Most people who want to start businesses find a piece of information that confirms what they already believed and treat it as validation. Robert had trained himself to do the opposite, to hold new information lightly and wait for it to either accumulate weight or dissolve. The flour answer accumulated weight. He could have invested substantially. He had the money, and he understood the market well enough that a significant investment would have been prudent rather than reckless. He invested almost nothing instead. This was not a guarantee. It was methodical. He had learned, across 3 companies and 40 years, that the moment you invest significantly in an idea is the moment you stop being able to see it clearly. Investment creates attachment. Attachment creates the need to be right. The need to be right makes you interpret the information you receive through the filter of what you need the information to say, rather than what it is actually saying. He wanted to stay wrong for as long as possible. He wanted to be wrong cheaply, so that each mistake cost him little and taught him much. He produced a small batch of locally sourced flour, mixed with a blend of spices he had developed through trial and simple packaging that was better than what most local producers used, but not expensive. He priced it honestly, not at the lowest possible price, which he had learned creates the wrong expectation, but at the price that reflected the actual quality and left room for the margins his potential partners would need to make selling it worthwhile. He offered it to 5 shops. 3 said no. 1 said no, but explained why in enough detail that he learned something important about how shopkeepers evaluated new products. 1 said yes. He went back to his kitchen and adjusted the formula based on what the 4 refusals had taught him. Then he offered it to 5 more shops. This continued for months. He didn't find it discouraging. This surprised him slightly. He remembered finding rejection discouraging when he was young, when the stakes of each no felt existential because his own assessment of himself was tied up in the outcome. Now the rejections felt like information. Each one narrowed the distance between where he was and where he needed to be. The most important thing he did in those months was listen. Not to what people said they wanted, he had learned long ago to hold that lightly, but to the gap between what they said and what they did, to the moment of hesitation before a yes that told him the yes was fragile, to the quality of a no that told him whether it was a no to this specific thing or a no to the category of things this specific thing belonged to. He also watched David. He went to David's stall every market day and bought something and talked. He shared what he was learning, not to use David as a sounding board, exactly, but because he had found over the years that explaining what you are doing to someone who is genuinely interested in it clarifies your own thinking more effectively than any other method. David listened with the intensity of someone receiving something they have always wanted but been told was not available to them. How do you know which of the things people say actually matters? He asked one morning. You don't, Robert said. Not at first. You listen to everything, and you hold it, and you wait for the pattern. The pattern always appears eventually. What if you run out of money before the pattern appears? Then you start too big. Start small enough that you can afford to wait for the pattern. David was quiet for a moment, looking at his own stall with an expression that Robert recognized as the expression of someone reorganizing something fundamental. I think I started too big, David said. 10 years ago, I made 300 packets for my first market day. I thought I needed to show I was serious. How many did you sell? 42. And the other 258? I ate them. My family ate them. My neighbors ate them. Pause. For months. The formula Robert eventually landed on was simpler than he had expected. Locally sourced flour, milled by the women's cooperative he had visited in his first month of walking. A blend of 3 spices that he had tested across 50 iterations, the final combination arriving not through calculation, but through the patience of elimination. Packaging that told the story of where the ingredients came from and who had made them, not because he had read that storytelling sells products, though it does, but because the story was true, and true stories have a quality that constructed narratives don't. He also created a partnership model. Small sellers, people like David, could buy the flour at a price that left room for them to mark it up and make a meaningful profit. He trained them, briefly but specifically, in how to talk about the product to customers. He told them what he had found people responded to and what he had found they didn't. The product did not explode overnight. It grew the way things grow when they are built on real foundations rather than momentum, continuously, without drama, accumulating customers who came back because the product was actually good rather than customers who tried it once because of effective marketing and then disappeared. Within a year, David was one of his best partners. The plain plastic packets had been replaced by packaging that told the story of 10 years of making something with ingredients that grew nearby and knowledge that came from a grandmother. The 20 or 30 loyal customers had become 150, not because anything had changed about the snack, because the bridge had finally been built between what the snack was and the people who would value it. Robert wrote in his notebook on the day he decided the experiment was complete. The question was never whether the product was good enough. The product was always good enough. The question was whether the person behind the product understood, deeply and patiently enough, what problem they were actually solving and for whom. You cannot learn that from a business book. You can only learn it from people, from walking through markets and watching faces, and asking questions and listening to answers, and waiting for the pattern, from staying small long enough to be wrong cheaply, from treating every rejection as a message rather than a verdict. The greatest mistake most people make when starting something is confusing the fear of beginning with the wisdom of waiting. They are not the same thing. Fear of beginning is about protecting yourself. Wisdom of waiting is about learning enough to be useful. The way to tell the difference is simple. Are you gathering information while you wait, or are you simply avoiding the moment when the information will be tested? If you are gathering information, keep going. The pattern will appear. If you are avoiding the test, then the fear has dressed itself up as wisdom, and you should begin immediately, as small as possible, and let the rejections teach you what waiting never will. There is something that most people who dream about starting a business don't understand, not because they are incapable of understanding it, but because no one has put it to them plainly. The money is not the most important thing. Not at the beginning, not in the middle, and in businesses worth building, not at the end either. This is not a romantic idea. It is a practical observation. The businesses that fail for lack of money almost always fail for lack of understanding first. The money ran out because it was spent on solutions to problems that had not yet been properly understood. The most important thing, at every stage of building something, is the quality of your attention to the people you are trying to serve. Not to what they tell you they need, to what they actually need, which you discover not by asking better questions, but by watching more carefully, listening more patiently, and being willing to hold what you learn loosely until the pattern appears. Robert had learned this across 3 companies and 40 years. He had learned it again in a village market, from a man with 20 or 30 loyal customers and a snack that deserved 100 times more of them. And the most important thing he had done, the thing that allowed him to learn it again, rather than simply repeating what he already knew, was to start small, to stay wrong cheaply, to let the information teach him rather than the plan. If you are standing at the beginning of something, held in place by the fear that you don't have enough money, enough experience, enough knowledge, enough time, I want to offer you something that is not encouragement exactly, but is perhaps more useful than encouragement. You don't need more than you have right now to begin. You need less than you think, less money, because the learning that comes from starting small is worth more than the efficiency that comes from starting large. Less experience, because the experience that matters most is the experience you build by doing the thing rather than the experience you accumulate by watching other people do it. What you need is patience. The patience to walk through a market for 2 weeks before you say a word to anyone. The patience to hold a piece of information for 3 weeks before you trust it enough to act on it. The patience to make a small batch and take the rejections and treat each one as a message. And you need attention. The willingness to look at people, really look, with the part of you that is interested, rather than the part of you that is anxious, and let what you see shape what you build. The pattern will appear. It always does. For the people who stay in the market long enough to find it,